Pack. My name is Rands, and this is the show where we unwrap the stories and crack the mysteries of collectible games each and every episode. And on today's episode, we are sinking our teeth into one very special collectible card game, Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with it, Vampire, or VtES for short, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of its early publication history, which at times was unique and at times difficult in this introduction. So, originally published as Jihad in 1994 by Wizards of the Coast, Vampire: The Eternal Struggle was the third collectible card game to hit the US market, and it was the second by now legendary game designer Richard Garfield, who had just created Magic the Gathering. And when Richard was designing Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, he wanted to prove how different collectible card games could be from one another. And it was a little bit different from Magic the Gathering. You see what Richard did? Instead of being a quick, short game like Magic, he made VtES a huge, immersive game that took hours to play. And instead of being two-player focused like Magic was at the time, he made VtES a multiplayer experience. Now, VtES was published by Wizards of the Coast for a couple of years, but eventually it fell off their release schedule when they shifted their focus towards other games. But that does not mean the community stopped loving the game, and they gathered online to talk about it, discuss deck building tips, and even argue sometimes over the game's somewhat infractious rule set. And eventually, White Wolf Publishing, the publishers of the World of Darkness role-playing game books, came along in the year 2000 and resurrected the game for the community, where it thrived for about a decade. And it's that decade that we're going to focus on in today's episode, because we have somebody who is quite instrumental to that time in the game. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce them. So I doubt I'd get little argument if I said our guest today was a man of multiple talents, both technical and creative. He is a programmer, he is a photographer, he is a mathematician, but it is his time as lead designer of Vampire: The Eternal Struggle from the years 2000 to 2010 that he is joining us today. Please welcome to the Booster Pack the man who has probably the most important initials in Vampire: The Eternal Struggle history, LSJ. Welcome to the Booster Pack, our guest, L. Scott Johnson. Scott, how are you?
Hi, thanks, Rands. Thanks. That's a lovely introduction. That's very well done. I'm great. How are you?
I'm not so bad. I really appreciate you joining me. I'd love to dig into this. As I would say to many people, I'd be the first to say that I'm not the most immersed in this segment of VtES history, but I can't wait to learn about it. So we're going to go on a bit of a journey and see what we can figure out. So thanks again for joining me.
All right.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. That's always a great place to start. Collectible games, there was at least one or two, as I said in the intro, before VtES. When did you start playing collectible games? Did you start with VtES?
With Magic. Yeah, I got into Magic just a little bit before Vampire, so sometime around Fallen Empires, I guess. Maybe whatever was just before that. Anyway, yeah, I'd heard about Magic before. And it didn't strike me as what I wanted to do. I played board games plenty at that time, and the whole thing about collectible card games, I don't know, it didn't strike me. But then of course somebody gave me a free card.
The first bite's always free.
Right, and there you go. So then our little group incorporated Magic, and pretty soon it was a lot of Magic and not much of anything else. So we were excited when we heard that Garfield had another one coming out.
Okay, were you immediately drawn to? Obviously, you'd heard that it was like a set in the Vampire the Masquerade role-playing game world. Was that something that immediately drew you to it?
In theme, yes. I mean, we none of us had played Vampire the Masquerade, but you know, vampires are cool. So we were looking forward to that aspect of it.
Awesome. So, you know, as they say nowadays, you were like basically a day zero adopter. You were excited for its release. Now, tell me about those first years. Like you said, you know, collectible card games coming into your gaming group revolutionized it. And it was obviously something that hit with a huge impact to your gaming circle. So when Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, or I guess at the time, as we mentioned in the introduction, Jihad, as it was called, hit your gaming group, tell me about how that happened. How did you first start playing? Was there like organized tournaments? How was that different to the other games that you played before?
Right. So we hadn't been in the organized tournament scene in Magic, right? We just played in our local group, and then we started playing Vampire Jihad in our local group. And we'd play both in the same night, and very quickly it ended up, well, part of the problem, part of the thing was that Jihad took a long time. So when you play it, you don't play as much other things, right? So anyway, we ended up playing more Jihad than Magic or other things very quickly, right? We transitioned pretty quickly to that, and and very shortly thereafter weren't playing Magic at all.
So the conversation switched from swamps and mountains to Camarilla and all that sort of stuff instead.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, everything was Camarilla at the time.
Absolutely. Did you? Well, speaking of the factions and stuff like that, the clans. Did you have a specific favorite deck that you were playing in those really early years before Wizard had the game?
I mean, I remember being excited for some Ventru, the voter power base, whatever it was. Anyway, Ventru headquarters. And I'm sure that I had a deck built around that, but I mean, I was playing everything.
That's pretty cool. Well, I mean, at that stage as well, you can't have access to every single card. It's not like you were ordering singles online and stuff.
Right, right.
Well, speaking of online, that's sort of, you know, you take your presence for VtES just from the local game group into an international sort of arena when you jump onto these aforementioned VtES sort of forums and stuff like that. Tell me about how you got involved in that and what your presence online sort of did, because that's sort of what gave you the name in the community itself.
I mean, before people had web pages, right? Before that was a thing, there was just the news groups and the mailing lists, right? VtES-L, which I found out about later. The first thing I found was the Rec Games Trading Cards Jihad. So the USENET forums. And yeah, we would get on there, and you know, I found it probably like most people found it, trying to find answers to some question that our group had about the rules. And so yeah, some of my group were on that, and we had discussions. The problem, of course, at the time was that there's no Google, right? There's no archive of anything. So when you ask a question, you get a bunch of yahoos giving you answers that sometimes conflict, and then you get the official response when you're lucky. And at first we got the official response, and that was fine. But eventually, because of the priorities and everything over at Wizard of the Coast, right? When Jihad wasn't doing as well as they had hoped, whatever, their presence online was starting to get thin. And so then when you ask a question, right, there's no answer except for the yahoos. And I'm one of the yahoos, right? There's a bunch of people just without any credentials, just spouting answers, right? And if they conflict, well, then they conflict, and that's it, because there's no Google.
Yeah, there's no way to fact check these things.
And that's where I got the start for the rulemonger moniker.
Well, that's so interesting. I was going to say you went to the group looking for answers and ended up becoming somebody who was a core source of giving rules answers. That's hilarious. So tell me all about how you got into that role as the rulemonger.
When you get the yahoos talking and there's no way to resolve it, right? I understand the problem, right? Even if I know I'm right, everybody else knows that they're right, and you know, you can see that this reality core is the problem.
Yeah, citations needed.
Yeah, exactly. So I just start my own Google, right? I start a text document every time the official answer comes down from anywhere. Right? I save the entire message into a text file that just grew, right? That way, later, when the official answer wasn't forthcoming, right, I could then say, well, Tom said on September 4th, right, that it worked this way. So there. Right? And if somebody contradicts me, then probably they read something that Tom or somebody else had said earlier, right? And at the early days of Jihad, there were a lot of flip-flopping of the, or not flip-flopping, just different ways of representing the rules, some of which conflicted.
Yep.
So then I started citing people's names. Tom was the original Tom Wiley,
famously Magic's first rules manager.
Right, and he was the net rep for Vampire, for Jihad.
So let's talk about that then. How does the official role go from somebody at Wizards of the Coast? Like you said, they had shifting resources at the time, and they started to take focus away from Jihad as their focus started to go to things like, you know, once they got TSR and all that sort of stuff. How did you become sort of, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, almost the official representative of Wizards of the Coast in those sort of Jihad or VtES sort of forums?
And I mean, eventually it wasn't almost, it was the official. I had the little paperwork to prove it, that I was the official net rep. But first, right, so yeah, they had Tom and they had some other people, eventually Sean Carnes, who you interviewed recently. And you know, we butted heads, I'm sure, arguing about things, but we got along, and then he had other priorities as well. They found somebody else. I think I think Sean was near the end. There might have there was one after him who came and went pretty quickly. And it might have been Sean. Maybe Sean at least dropped my name. I don't know how influential he was in getting me the gig. He had dropped my name just because of the way I was organizing the rules reference and trying to stay. Well, I would be very clear as to when I was presenting. Here's the official rule, right, that had been given whenever it was given. Also, if you care, here's what I would say you should do, right? And if what I said you would do, should do, differed from the official, I would make that very clear, right? I tried to be objective as well as making the game internally consistent.
Well, that's so important, especially when there wasn't that sort of focus from on high. You know, you needed somebody who was almost a conduit for all these different opinions and was able to filter that through, especially when there was 3 or 4 bodies who had come through and all just interpreted things differently. Who knows if they had worked very closely together at that time.
And there was also the problem of the tournaments at the time. Whenever you had an official tournament anywhere, there was not, as far as I know, ever an instance of a tournament that followed the then current rules, right? They always brought their own house rules to it. Some 6-card limits, 2-card limits.
It's so fascinating, just to interject there, it's so fascinating because of that era. Obviously, I follow a lot of collectible card games, and Magic was so the opposite. Like, it was so stringent to the rules, to the point where somebody was getting disqualified for not tapping their land before they played their spell and got like disqualified in the finals or something like that. Whereas in the VtES side, they're just like, you know, you guys figure it out. You know, does it sound good? Go for it.
I wasn't much into the tournament then either, but I heard on the forums, right, that these problems were popping up, and especially when you start talking about whether or not the game is supposed to have a 4-card limit or whatever number you want to pick, and they'll say, well, the guy at the tournament told me it was this way. I'm sorry, you know, that's not that's not true.
Well, everybody as well is being taught almost by word of mouth as well at this point as well. So whoever teaches them, almost like almost metaphorically like a vampire taking on another vampire and transforming it, whoever transforms them, so to speak, is going to tell them what their rules are.
Another symptom of there being no Google, right? And the USENET is not, I mean, even for geeks that want to play vampire, right? USENET is another level of geekdom, right? You got to, there are ways to get into it, and anyway, it's not accessible.
Yeah. So talking about all these rules, as we mentioned, you had the nickname online as the rules monger, and we've also talked about the internal conflict that would be spurned on in those sort of online groups, because as you said, there was no real way to check it. You couldn't just jump over to wizards.com and check up the rules document. Tell me about some of those conflicts. And I have heard that there was a specific sort of almost like watershed moment in that sort of conflict's probably not the right word. But, you know, jihad, if you will, of the fans. There was a 7-7 rules document or something like that, a specific set of rules that you crafted that sort of shaped the game moving forward. Tell me about that.
That started the rule mongering with the creation of the house rules list. So in addition to just archiving every official answer to a question, right? When it occurred to me that my sensibilities were somehow better for the game than the official answer.
As this conduit.
Right. And I didn't want to present it that way. So I just started collecting house rules lists so that we could do something like no 4-card limit, or say that there was no vote pushing, for instance, whatever. And even though that wasn't the official rule, a lot of the people online felt that it was a good rule. But anyway, so I started collecting that, and then we would just, I would just put tally marks, initials behind each rule. So no vote pushing. Well, LSJ is on board with that, and then Adrian Sullivan and Kurt Adams, whatever. You know, we just list all those out, and that way you had this whole list of everybody's house rules. And that's some of them I didn't agree with, but yeah, they went in there. If you say that you guys play this way, bam, it's in there. So this house rules list got huge really quickly. And then later, I became the official rule person, rules giver, whatever. And earlier, I became the official answer giver, but I couldn't make any rules, right? So the official net rep, and that went on for a while. but of course, as the resources at Wizard of the Coast drifted even further, just collect questions that I didn't have answers to, and I wouldn't get answers to them, right? And eventually that led to Wizard of the Coast finally saying, okay, fine, you can get the answers. And so I did. And I tested the waters with the 628 rule set, which was just a few wiggly little bothersome corner cases that didn't really affect the game much, right? But they were brand new rules, right? They were new with me. Here's the rule to do ruling is how. And everybody was fine with it, right? Hey, great. All right, fantastic.
We're on board. Yeah. Now you're like, all right, you don't know what's coming.
Right. And so then on July 7th, 1998.
At this point, Wizard had more or less stopped publishing the game at this point.
Oh, yes. Right. Yeah. This is well after the Sabbat. When they published the last set, the Sabbat, that was before the guy before me, right? So there had been a whole series of rules makings after the last set was published, and there's always rumors that there's going to be another set published, but it never happened. Anyway, so when 7.7 came out, it was really, the idea was really to get the game back into a cohesive whole, right? Some of the things I felt just couldn't be supported, right? There were rulings that would circle around and they just weren't going to work. So that one was the big one where fundamental things changed back to the right way, LSJ's way, whatever.
Depends on who you ask, I guess.
If you ask some people, it was not right, right? And so there was a schism. There were other people who were so anti this way of handling things, right? This heavy-handed, errata-based thing that was going to make it harder for them to play with people who weren't on the internet and whatever else, right? That there was a schism, and they were going to play by their rules, the old rules, the current rules, some new house rules, who cares, whatever, something that wasn't the official rule, and it was a big deal.
Oh my God, like, I mean, this is all playing out of the internet, but it does sound like an epic part of history where, two sections split off into it and go their separate ways and stuff like that. So this is all during the time when, effectively the game is dark, as fans call it, into poor. They basically, you guys aren't sure if the game's coming back or anything like that. And eventually you get an official announcement, I think, from maybe Ryan Dancy, who comes down and says, look, the game's on hold, which basically just means it's canceled. Do you remember how it felt hearing that as somebody who had poured so much personal time into it and was looking forward to it in such a way?
I mean, the official announcement didn't change anything. I mean, everybody knew at that point that nothing was coming, and the official announcement that nothing is coming. Well, okay. Thanks for confirming. Now, where were we?
Right. Well, in those years, if I'm not mistaken, there was some, I don't know if the word official would be the right way, but especially like, your group supporting tournaments and stuff like that in around 99 and stuff like that before it came back. Were you involved in that?
Just before the VEKN, the Vampire Elder Kindred Network, which was our idea of the rules management system. And so around before the time that I was the official rules giver, right, that some of the house rules list had morphed into sort of the first schism between Wizards of the Coast's tournament thing, where sometimes a 2-card limit or a 6-card limit would pop up unexpectedly, right? And so there were a set of us that made what we called, somewhat self-importantly, the Sensible Players Tournament rules, right? The SPTR. So we had gathered what amounted to a bunch of house rules and just made the Sensible Players Tournament rules, and that's how some of the tournaments at some Gen Con or something got played under the Sensible Players Tournament rules. Anyway, so when the VEKN was formed, so after I was the official rules person and was writing the rules document, basically I just took the Sensible Players Tournament rules and wrote, again, now here's the real tournament rules, which was the VEKN rule.
That's amazing. And and VEKN, for people who don't know, is Vampire Elder Kindred Network, which is sort of like a fan player group and probably one of the first examples ever of a mass organized collectible card game players group, even before, say, something like Magic or even Star Wars CCG's players committee and stuff like that. It's really impressive, and it still lasts till today, if I'm not mistaken.
At some point, they had a more official capacity themselves as well. If that's still true, then maybe it is.
Definitely is. Well, that's also fascinating. Again, like I said, if you were to play it out over a game, it would feel like some sort of epic, saga of sorts. Now, eventually, this time of Tapor comes to an end, and you guys all get this news that eventually the game might come back through the publishers of World of Darkness, White Wolf. So, tell me about, you're heavily involved in that. Tell me about what your first hearings of this particular revival or resurrection of sorts was.
Right. Steve Wick at White Wolf had heard of my involvement somehow with Vampire through one of the distributors, and so contacted me. Are you interested in designing some cards?
So that's like basically the ultimate collectible card game fan's dream. Your game is gone by the wayside, and all of a sudden the owner of it is coming up to you and saying, "Hey, do you want to be the guy?" Right.
I'm like, what kind of question is this? Of course.
That's fantastic. Well, tell me all about that journey. Like, how do you transition? Did you have game design experience before that? Like, tell me all about what it was like going from being just this guy who was basically, went from citing rules to being cited for rules online to being in charge of the entire game themselves.
Right. And so I let my first response to Steve Wick, right, was, I don't have any experience, and of course I would like to, right? Right. So yeah, I went with that. Started reading up on on as much of the World of Darkness source material that I could get my hands on.
Right.
So yeah, and eventually, right, I got shipments from White Wolf of source material, right, boxes of, so I have to read through that. And it was not a chore at all, right? This stuff is phenomenal. It's
especially as somebody who was familiar with these characters, but in such a different way as well, right? Like, you've seen these characters on cards for years. You said you didn't really play Masquerade, but all of a sudden you're reading about these characters that you've been putting in decks for years.
Exactly. And finding little hooks for other cards, right? And so, like I do, I started another text file, right?
Do what you know.
Yeah, I had gotten a lot of practice with my text file makings. So that came in handy.
So what was the process like, sort of, re-rolling this boulder? Like, obviously, you've got to think about the fact that you're servicing these old fans. You want to appeal to a new audience as well for White Wolf. Did they have any direction for you? Did they basically say, "Hey, go for it, kid"?
Well, no, we talked about what the game needed, right? So just fleshing out some of the ideas. The first set was Sabbat War, right? Because Sabbat was the biggest seller, or the most sold out, most sought after at the time. Whatever, something. It looked like that was the thing that we should start with, right? A nice, comfortable set, a lot of reprints, some new cards, a safe bet, right? Was just to get back in, because the game's been dead, 4 or 5 years now. So just make sure that you don't sink the ship before you can get started, right? You've got to get something that sells to show that this can make some more money.
Something familiar but different, sort of thing.
Exactly. So we talked about what we needed, what we wanted to do, and then what the parameters were, right? How many new cards, how many cards total, that sort of thing. And from there, then I just went off and I was on my own, researching things, just trying to put together a balanced set of cards. I think it was 8 cards per clan. It wasn't much, right? It was a tiny little sample of things that I had to make new, right? And the big thing, of course, well, not of course, whatever. The big thing was that there were going to be pre-constructed starter decks,
which had never happened in the game before.
Right. You just had a starter deck, right, which was just random cards. It probably in Magic you could get away with a starter deck, right? 5 colors. Fine, it's not going to play well, but it'll play. Vampire, you don't just have 5 colors. It's not going to do that well. Anyway, any starter deck you got from Jihad or Vampire was just not playable out of the box. The booster pack things, even Sabbat with its mega boosters, right? They didn't have that problem because they didn't have anything called a starter, so nobody was confused. This time we actually had starters that you could play because they were not random, right? They were designed.
Interesting revolution, and I'm glad that that sort of would help new players who have either discovered the game in this sort of dark period that it went through and stuff like that to sort of ease them into it.
Right. Also, had the added bonus of selling more starters. Right. In general, starter decks aren't what players who buy a lot of cards buy. Right. They buy the boosters because that's where your rarity bang for the buck comes. But if you have 4 different starter decks, well, you've just sold 4 decks to a guy who's going to buy 0 or 1 of them.
So initially, like, obviously you guys start with Sabat War, and then obviously the real big sort of thing I think I understand from that sort of time is you guys do a couple of sets that are really interesting. You push some new mechanics in the game, and then you come out with that big Camarilla base set.
So first Sabat War, and then the second time we hit big was with 3rd edition, what we called 3rd edition.
Right. Okay, so in this early time, like, you've gone from designing a couple of new cards and doing a lot of reprints and stuff like that. How did you started to take on these roles of expanding out and designing bigger and bigger sets and even creating brand new clans and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, after the first one, right, you have a lot more time because you're already starting to design the next set, even when you're designing that first one, right? Because I'm scribbling down notes, right? And obviously not all the notes are for Sabat cards. When I'm just scanning through all the source material, I'll get things for all sorts of things.
Okay, well, you sort of said the next big sort of, again, like I said at the early part of the episode, I'm not 100% familiar, but you said in that first sort of arc, you would sort of say it was from, Sabat War all the way through to 3rd edition, which was sort of a big rebirth for the game. What sort of memories do you have about adding certain things in there, coming up with ideas from that source material? Is there anything you're super proud of that you're like, man, I love that mechanic we threw in there, whether it was advanced or something like that? Like,
I mean, no, most of the groundbreaking mechanics weren't that great, really. But and it's not about the way the game is designed. You really just need pieces, right? That work well together. Any big thing, like there were issues when you had big novel things like Return to Innocence, right? That somehow the game becomes all about that or anti that.
Huge card.
Right. It was a big card, big powerful effect. It had a heavy cost, but right, obviously you would build your deck to handle the cost and bam, right? It's a killer card. So we had tried a couple of different ways to errata it, and eventually maybe lazily just ended up banning it. So right, the new mechanics I had were either twiddly or, and I'm sure coming up with this or that was exciting at the time, but I don't remember anything that stands out. I mean, eventually at the end, right, there was Hunter, Hunter the Reckoning.
But that there was a lot of questions about that later on.
But we're not there yet. So yeah. There were other little things, but it's all just a matter of making sure that the cards can flow nicely rather than making one big rock to disrupt the pond.
So in this time, like, obviously you'd taken over this mantle from Wizards of the Coast, and you guys were doing this, and it was very fan driven at the time. Did you end up getting a chance to talk to anybody from Wizards of the Coast, perhaps, either whether it was Sean or Matt Burke or even Paul Peterson or even Richard Garfield while you were designing this? Did you seek any advice from them or even happen to run across them at that time?
I got to wave to them at cons sometimes, but yeah, we never really sat down and talked about designing. I never met Garfield, but I did meet some other people from White Wolf. Some people that had known me in terms of just product support or whatever back when I was working for them. So yeah, I'd already met them at cons when I was running official tournaments for them then.
That does raise another question. So you, at this time, I mean, I don't know, but did you work at White Wolf when you were doing this, or was this all like by remote freelance sort of stuff as you were putting this together? Did you have a team? Like, what was the situation?
Everything is remote. So I'm not even in the same state as White Wolf. Yeah. And when I Wizard of the Coast, I'm on the wrong coast, right? So obviously that was on remote work. But yeah, and right, it wasn't a big deal because it's all digital files anyway, and I'm not I'm not having to move product from here to there and tinker with anything, right? I submit text files and that's that. Same thing with when we do play tests, right? We have play testers all over the world. Send out email, get email in reply.
Do you remember, like, obviously, you're pretty new to designing and stuff like that. Do you remember anything that, you designed or pitched in the play testing and stuff like that came back and it was like, no, this is not going to work? What were you thinking, sort of thing?
I remember that happened. But either, it got fixed or it got dropped. Either way, I don't remember it now. I don't remember the specific, right? It was like, oh yeah, okay. I see. And they would include descriptions of how the deck went or how the game went, whatever. And you, oh yeah, I see. Or yeah, that really does work well or break well with this other thing. I know that happened. It happened quite a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Scott, we're not making a card called Return to Innocence.
Right.
So is there any other memories from that sort of first couple of years, when you're doing it for the first time, you wanted to share before we move on to say something like third edition?
No, I mean, it was exciting. Right. Just figuring out how much material there was I don't know, it was kind of frightening, really. I just reading all of that. It took a lot of time. It was fabulous reading, and in addition to just the source books, right? There's they had novel series.
That raises the question then, like, in those times, did you sort of have the direction as to what set you were doing next, or did White Wolf say, all right, well, we've got this book coming out, it's on our release schedule, can you do something to tie into that?
But that happened most obviously with Gehenna, right? When the time of Gehenna came around, they wanted to make sure that we had a set themed to that, so that they would find out. But most of the rest of it was a conversation, right? They talk about some ideas that they have or that I have, or where we need to go, and yeah, we figure out what the game needed, right? What holes still needed plugging, or where we could branch next.
So I guess my next question then is, like, as we said earlier, third edition comes out, and that's sort of like a whole reboot for the game in a way. And it comes out a little bit later, and it even has, I think, as far as I know, some printing problems as well, or a mistake or something like that in it. What memories do you have from third edition and stuff like that?
You mentioned the printing problems, and that reminded me of them. I wouldn't have pulled that out as one of the dominating characteristics of third edition, but I do remember now that I think that the cards were slightly thinner or shorter.
I mean, my reading of it, and I'm not sure, it was like the backs were different or something. The backs were flipped, or the cards were printed upside down or something.
The back could have been upside down. That might be it. Yeah, I do know at least one set, and I thought it was third edition, had the card size just a half a millimeter off, just when you shuffled it, you knew.
Right.
And we had always had problems. The printers on the card backs, especially the greens, I think the greens would shift all over the realm of what we would call green, right? And so if you put two of them together in the first 7 sets or whatever, if you put two of them next to each other, you could say which one came from Ancient Hearts or from third edition, right? You just,
like, the spectrum of green was so diverse, the blue and the yellow between the two would just be so variable.
The good news is that this did not bother anybody as much as you might think, thanks to the thing that killed us, right? The name change, right? We already had the card back thing solved, right? We do not care about card backs. Right? You can mess that up no matter how badly you mess that up, right? We don't care. We're gonna sleeve it and you do whatever you want.
It's so funny you say that. It reminds me of, like, in those early Wizard days where there were certain rules where if you were gonna play, the Jihad titled cards, you had to have a certain number in your deck compared to the other one, so nobody could tell. And I really believe that the VtES community was probably one of the first, and earliest and most efficient adopters of card sleeves too.
Right. Specifically for that, because there was that very convoluted rule as to how you construct your deck that ended with or play with sleeves, right? Okay, fine. I'm not worried about this rule, right? I'm just going to put my stuff in sleeves. I was going to do that anyway, whatever.
That's certainly the case. And obviously in those sort of early days, back in those sort of 94, 95, only the most pedantic people were seen putting things in card sleeves. But obviously, you know, history has told us who was right in that situation.
Right. Yeah. Now you get a custom design of card sleeves for each of your decks, you know, and of course you do. What are you, some kind of heathen?
Absolutely. So let's before we jump into things like the mini expansions and I think it's, what is it, Night of the Reckoning and all that sort of stuff, before we jump into that, let me ask you just some broad questions. Okay, so there was a bunch of mechanics, like I said, we said earlier, you guys added, you know, things like, you know, group and things like advance and all that sort of stuff. And even later, something like research. Do you have anything that you absolutely loved there that you were like, oh man, I love the fact I've added this to the game, like in that sort of 10-year period that White Wolf was publishing it?
So you brought up research area. That was one I was trying to remember a second ago when you asked me what I remember add. Anyway, the research area was something I had big plans for, but which never really developed. So I would have marked that as to one of my slip ups. I mean, it's got room for expansion, and it's good to go ahead and name such a thing properly when you get started, so you have room to expand into it. But of course, that never did. Grouping, right, was very controversial, but it was necessary if you want to keep printing vampires, right? The choice was to just leave the vampire set that we had alone and never print any more Camarilla or Sabat or those guys. We'd have to come up with new Kindred of the East or something. We'd have to always be moving to new groups. Not groups is the wrong word now, because I've
sets, yeah,
sets or whatever. So the grouping was a way around that so that we could print more vampires, since there's still a lot of vampires in the World of Darkness, right? So there's plenty more source material that we need, but you can't put all of that in there and just let people pick and choose, because then it's what we call create a clan, you know, Frankenstein your perfect vampire set, and then just go find the ones that have been printed to match. So yeah, the grouping rule was nearly necessary, except that there was the other choice, right, of not printing any more vampires. So that's fine. I'm proud of that. I mean, it's a good solution to that problem. Sure. You brought up one more.
The advanced.
Oh, advanced. Right. Advanced was fine. I mean, I had other ideas of how to do it. Try to get it into the library instead of into the crypt. But it's difficult. Just with the way the cards are set to work, to make that mechanic work in any direction. I think what we got with the crypt card, and then you can bring it out. And one of the other problems developing it was allowing you to bring out the advanced version first and merge it, you know, with the base version under, which is thematically a little off.
Yeah, I think it might not have been the most elegant, flavorful solution, but at the same time, you guys added a whole bunch of new mechanics during those 10 years. Almost every set had something new and exciting for players to talk about. And I really, I really think, some, like you said earlier, some were a little bit weaker and some were a little bit stronger, but it's really impressive that you're able to mine this sort of rule set for such a fascinating, in-depth sort of wild time. And sometimes things go really right, and then other times things don't go as right. So, I mean, your answer to this question will probably lead into the future questions, but do you have one or a mechanic or something like that you really didn't feel like you nailed down or you weren't particularly proud of?
I mean, I never really felt that the advancement thing was where it needed to be, right? I always wanted, I had this dream in my head of the perfect way to do it, but then when you wake up, right, you only get smoke. And there's a better way to do it, I'm sure, but I just can't find it. So I mean, that one is kind of just needling at me, I guess. I don't regret it. I think it's fine. But I feel sure that there's a better way to do that sort of thing out there.
So, okay, well, we'll use that and we'll move on to another one that may be seen as a little bit problematic, but let's talk about the concept behind it first. We were talking about set size earlier, you went, small, large and stuff like that. And a little bit further into it, White Wolf starts publishing sort of what they call mini sets, where it's 20 rare cards, 20 uncommon cards, 20 common cards. Was there a specific reason for the shift in that particular release structure?
Not that I recall. It was I mean, the actual numbers come down to the printers themselves, right? What you can fit onto a sheet and what the sorting material, what the sorting machines can handle, and as far as putting it back together. But no, that was it. You at some point, perhaps you get down to a choice between 60 and 120. And so you go, well, we can't go to 120, so let's do 60.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, we obviously, you know, I chronicle a lot of collectible card games, and Vampire is incredibly unique because it's, you know, not only does it keep coming back from the grave over and over, but it also lasted, you know, 10 years for any game, let alone one that had died and come back, is a huge accomplishment, and actually puts it in the top, I think I did the math once, it's like, you know, top 2 percentile of all Western collectible card games ever released, right? So I guess my question there is, like, just to piggyback on the set size thing, I don't know if you would have been privy to it, but was there any sets that you would have deemed like a failure financially or anything like that? Or was White Wolf really good about their print numbers or anything like that? They didn't overprint anything too badly, or maybe you weren't privy to it?
I mean, and my pay structure was royalties, not flat fees. So I was privy to.
I did not know that.
Right. And they all sold enough to make profit. So I guess that's good. I mean, profit is where I draw the line, right? Red and black. If you can stay in the black, you keep doing what you're doing.
That's fantastic. Well, okay, that's really interesting. So again, that just makes that more that accomplishment of 10 years even more impressive, because so often, you know, they'll get, you know, a publisher will get cocky or overprint or anything like that. But obviously, you know, the team at White Wolf who was deciding on that sort of thing obviously did a really good job. Now, we were talking about the 60 card size limit, and the first one of those was Night of the Reckoning, which does raise a lot of questions because it added something new to the game. Do you want to tell me about what it added to the game and why it might have been seen as controversial by the community?
Right. So the Knights of Reckoning, the hunter set, right? So it's anti-vampire. It's the guys who are hunting the vampires, and so therefore all of your crypt cards are not vampires, right? They're actual allies, mortals, whatever, hunters in this case. So we had that was the first time you had non-vampires in the crypt. But the big thing was conviction. We had what kind of amounts to land, right? It was these conviction cards, which you needed in place of blood, whatever, something, but they weren't in the crypt, right? The whole deal that Garfield had, that his genius move for Vampire, and I mean that literally, there's absolutely no sarcasm there, right? Was separating the decks, right? To put your vampires in one deck and all your library, the action cards and stuff in another deck. That way you didn't have what he called the land problem, right? That he was tired of Magic decks being 20% land.
Dead draws and stuff like that.
So we obviously I went against that, right? Back to the problem. Maybe it was a problem. I don't know. I think we handled it a little differently than land, but you put the resources that you need back into the library. So you have the hunters in the crypt. You have something that they kind of need, this conviction stuff, in the library. And the idea there that you can, because it's a small set, you can then focus more on small decks. Since the hunter deck really you couldn't make a pure hunter deck of any great size if you only had 60 cards total to work with, I guess was kind of the thinking. So we wanted the idea to be that you would make a smaller deck, and therefore you would have resources that stuck around. A lot of the vampire cards are ones that you cycle through really quickly, because it's draw and replace, unlike Magic, which was one draw per turn in theory. So the draw and replace means you cycle your deck pretty quickly. And this was again against that. It was a slower kind of mechanism, kind of to help also set the mortals apart from, or not the mortals, but the hunters. They are mortals, but they're imbued mortals. set them apart from vampires, so they actually feel different as well.
Right. So, and it caused, the schism was that it was such a different departure from what anything the game had done before, and they stood out.
They certainly did feel different, right? So mission accomplished there.
I mean, I think the design, in game design theory, obviously, if especially expandable games, if you're not doing things that are controversial and pushing the boundaries, you're not really doing anything overly exciting. So, like I said, it was obviously a big deal for the community, but at the same time, you tried it. Did you have any idea when you were creating it that it would be a sticking point the way that it was?
We play tested, obviously, and so I got some feedback from the play testers that showed me what I could be facing. So yeah, it wasn't a complete shock when it was actually printed and more of that came to light.
That's amazing. So we get to the sort of like those mini sets are sort of the back end after 3rd edition and everything like that. So do you have any other memories like that do you want to share about that time, like before, you start to wrap up the game and stuff like that? Like, is there anything else that you feel like that we've really missed, or any exciting, convention stories, or anything that you really, were like, oh, this is one of my main stories from my time at White Wolf and working on Vampire?
Right. The Gehenna thing was a big deal, and getting that, especially the Gehenna cards, right? So a brand new type of card. It was a discard phase action. Those were fun. They went again, kind of against the grain with certain people's outlooks as to what the game should be. But I really liked that mechanic, and working on that set. Especially working on that set at the same time that the World of Darkness was working on that set, right?
Yeah, like it would snowball and there would be excitement and stuff like that.
That was much more exciting, rather than trying to come up with cards that reflected source material that had been printed 5 years earlier.
I guess I should ask about it. Like, obviously, at some point, White Wolf decides that this isn't working for us anymore. And despite the fact that, you guys had been doing really well for 10 years, they decide to sort of wrap up the property with, I think it's Heirs to the Blood or something like that. That's one of the last sets, just as you sort of introduce this research mechanic and stuff like that. Tell me about what that was like. Like, how did you find out? Like, what was it you were told? Did you have anything in the process at the time?
That was 10 years into my run. And I had already indicated to them, to White Wolf, that I was thinking they need to find somebody else to start taking over the design. Right? That I was getting to the end of what I could bring that was new and fresh, right? That I think they needed new blood. And then they said, kind of the same deal, that they were having this issue or that issue with the print, or the direction that they wanted to go with their massively multiplayer thing that maybe the Icelanders had wanted to do. Whichever, there were other motivations going on for everybody, and so at some point we just came to the agreement. Oh, okay, yeah, this will probably be a good place to pause and then let things settle down, and we'll see what to do next, which turned out to be not much for a while.
Yeah, well, it's a very impressive time. Obviously, the community, like they had done back in between, 96 and 2000, had sort of took on the mantle and started doing their own thing, by the Vampire Elder Kindred network and stuff like that. Do you so in that case, you were obviously aware that the game was going to come to an end, and you didn't have anything in process? Like when you wrapped up, you weren't working on another expansion or anything?
There's that feedback loop. So yes, but yeah, I wasn't working on a set. Right, I still had my document of as yet unvisited ideas, but they hadn't started being sorted and sifted to make a set out of. No.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'm sure, obviously, Vampire had its own dedicated fan base and stuff like that, but it did track with what else was going on in the industry at the time. By 2009, 2010, the collectible card game industry was sort of being overshadowed by deck building games, and living card games are starting to come out. So I could understand why that decision was come to, at least on the White Wolf side, because it did look like there was this new dawn, and people had become tired of collecting randomized cards and stuff like that. But obviously, the game did survive and is still being published today.
Right.
Absolutely. So, eventually at some point I had heard there was a rumor a little bit about, in that time, speaking of like living card games and stuff like that, there was talk of maybe Fantasy Flight Games picking up the game in that time that they released Netrunner and stuff. Just maybe like loose talk. Did you ever get contacted about that?
I did not. I heard the same rumors you did. Right. No, nobody approached me for design work. and maybe because they already heard that I was not interested, but probably because my name didn't come up.
I mean, if you look at what they did with Android Netrunner and stuff like that, they sort of reworked it and stuff. So maybe they were working internally at that stage. But yeah, it was fascinating, and I would have loved to have seen it in that case. But I love the work that I've seen that was done by the fan communities during that sort of second Tapor of sorts.
Yeah, they did some PDF expansions and that sort of thing. Yeah, that was neat. I didn't think that was going to be doable, right? But obviously we'd gotten used to card sleeves by now. So yeah, print your own, sleeve it, and off to the races again.
It's interesting opportunity. Now, speaking of the community, I did reach out to them and ask if they had any community questions, and we aren't going to have time for all of them, but I'll throw a few at you just to see what you come up with and stuff like that. Answer what they've got. Nothing too tricky, I don't think. But we'll move on to the community questions segment. So my first community question comes from, and again, I'm going to say this for the entire segment. I'm sorry if I butcher any of these names. Luis Paleta Duarte. He says, do you currently keep up with what's going on with Vampire: The Eternal Struggle? Like any of the newest expansions, the recent Kickstarter, or even what Black Chandra is doing at the moment?
I don't really. There's occasionally I'll see a post of somebody making a question on the Vampire group, Facebook group. And I just can't help myself, and I wade in there to just with whatever card text they present, right? And by the way it's written, it will be this way, right? And try to, but whatever.
Correct.
Exactly, right. So I'll wade in there against my better judgment, and nobody gets their feathers ruffled.
Yeah. Well, I mean, old habits die hard, right?
Exactly. That I can't help it. That's in my DNA.
All right, so I'll move on to my next community question then. Jean Levonquist, I don't think I said that right, but he knows that I care about him.
I would say Yanni.
Okay, there you go. Let's go with that. Again, I'm only reading these, and as an Australian, my experience in saying various names is not very diverse. All the names I say end with O. Steve-O, Jacko, everything like that.
All right.
So anyway, Yanni, let's ask his question. Respectfully, he wants to know, is there anything in that original basic rule system that Richard Garfield created that you really felt challenged by and that you wish that you could have changed, but was such part of the inertia of the game that you really couldn't affect when you were playing, designing?
Well, no. I mean, everything worked phenomenally with Richard's design. My biggest thing is that the power level you would not be able to match. Not that his were overpowered, but that at the time, right after 5 years, when you start introducing cards, as soon as you make something as powerful as conditioning, say, so one of the more powerful cards in the base set, when you make something as powerful as, it seems really broken, right? And so the playtesters would jump on that, right? If it has, I mean, if you could just mathematically show that it's the same, then fine, right? But if it's a new mechanic like it ought to be, and it was on the same par as, say, conditioning, it wasn't going to fly, right? It's not there, and possibly that points to conditioning being too powerful, right? But at that, I wouldn't point to that as a real problem. It's just the way it is. I think conditioning is a fantastic card. So yeah, no, I think the game, especially the voting mechanics, came off fantastic. I wish there was a better way to support combat as a strategy instead of as a means to one of the other ends,
as a centerpiece of the game rather than a byproduct.
Right. But I don't think that's an actual failing of Garfield's, right? It's just the nature of how politics works, how power works, right? You don't get power punching kids on a street corner.
Yeah, you're not kidding there. Absolutely not in a giant epic vampire war that's gone for 1,000 years. Some street toughs aren't going to get you much cred.
It's the difference between, in the Marvel universe, right? You have the street level fighters, And then you have Avengers level fighters.
Well, actually, I do want to pull out a couple of things there because you did sort of trigger some things that I do want to comment on, and I don't know if I have a chance. Obviously, Richard did something right when he designed Vampire in the way that he did. Initially, maybe it wasn't as big as Magic or anything like that, but if you look at Magic in the present world, and I'm not sure how familiar you are, but the most popular way they say to play Magic nowadays is the Commander format, where it is a 4-player, it's free for all, not like Prey or Predator or anything like that, but it is a longer form sort of game. And obviously the same elements of gameplay that drew people to Vampire originally are now drawing massive amounts of Magic the Gathering fans to that format as well. So it's really interesting that Richard's design in that case was sort of become the right thing for the other game. It's sort of gone the other way. It's really fascinating.
Right. Yeah, and there was always back when I was still hearing more about Magic, there were two-headed giant or just straight up free for all. I think early on too, right after Vampire Jihad came out, there was a format that tried to implement the punch to your left mechanic. They didn't call it Predator Prey.
Yeah, there was Emperor, I think.
If you say so, I don't remember what it was, but
something like that.
The Predator Prey thing is straight up, exactly what a multiplayer game needs, right? Something to keep you focused in a direction instead of trying to go for Kingmaker or Silent Man wins, or whoever can avoid doing anything until the end. So anything that gets to Predator Prey, I like. If Commander is free for all and it works, fantastic. I'm sure that there's something else there that keeps it working. So I'm saying that you need Predator Prey to be a good multiplayer game.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to see this thread between the two Richard games sort of come together all these years later. This just tiny thread. And the other thing I wanted to point out there, and it's something that Sean Kahn sort of really alerted me to in his episode. And speaking of, those early cards that Richard made that sort of felt like there was no way to really match the power level later on when you were responsible for balancing the game. Richard's design philosophy is, the same one that ended up creating things like Black Lotuses and Moxes. He does like the power of something special in there, something that's, really exciting. He does like to have those sort of broken components in there as well. And that obviously might have influenced those early designs too.
I mean, you say that, and to me, I never really thought, and I haven't talked to him about it, but that he designed the Moxes to be uber powerful, right? That he just designed them as a card, as conditioning or as any other card, right? It turned out that the way people played decks, that this was going to be a huge deal, right? Overcoming the land limitation, whatever it was, right? That it's a huge deal. I don't think he set out to design a power card.
Well, so his idea was at the time, he just thought that people would just respect rarity and not go out and try and find 4 of everything.
I didn't know that was part of the base design, that the alpha design had rarity equals power.
Yeah, Richard's interpretation at the time was, I guess, that he thought that people would only buy, less than 5 booster packs.
Yes, I remember that that he wasn't expecting people to go out and buy it. But I wouldn't have stretched that to Richard thinking that rarity allowed power.
Well, the other thing that Richard, anyway, we could get into Richard conversations for hours. Well, one day, I'll leave that for an episode with him one day. But I will move on and give the respect to the rest of the community questions. So the next community question might be a quick one because I don't know whether there's going to be much of an answer for it. But Sam L asks, when you were working with White Wolf Publishing, were you privy to any talk about them reviving other CCGs that they had done in the past, like their earlier 90s ones, such as Rage, Arcadia, or even a collectible card game for their Exalted role-playing game?
I was not. We had talked a bit about Rage, just because we were making some werewolves, Guru, for the vampire game, and we for a second just talked about what it would be to get cards compatible, get them, and very quickly came to the conclusion that it wasn't ever going to work. Right,
immediately taboo.
Right. I mean, as soon as you look at it, right, you'll find that it's not going to happen. Right, that you're going to spend too much time about it. Yeah, no.
All right, well, thanks Ed for that question. All right, so I'll move on. Connor Morlang asks, when introducing a new clan, did you have any specific strategies to sort of make sure they were balanced or interesting or anything like that? Was there anything that you did that sort of to approach it? Like, was there any specific way that you did that each time?
I mean, the only approach or methodology about it would be to make sure, you know, the capacities, I mean, something mundane, right? That mechanically that you could make a deck and things. The rest of it is art, right? All of this is not, there's no formula for it. And so no, there wasn't a methodology. It was just go in and make something. You have the slots to fill. You want to make sure that you have some small caps and medium caps, and you know, you have those slots. But after that,
just feel it out.
Yeah, just feel it out. You make too much of one thing and you have to throw some of them out, or you find that you have not enough here and so you fill it in. Yeah, just art, mix and repeat.
Well, our last community question we've sort of already talked about. I will give a mention to William Vance and Joe Montero, just because they asked a lot about, and a couple other people did, about the imbued and obviously, you know, all the other things that came out of that as well. But we will refer to earlier parts in the episode there.
Yeah, I knew that was going to come up. That's always a topic when we talk about the history of Vampire. The imbued was a sticking point from the moment it came out. And right, that anytime, not that I talk about it much anymore, but back in the day, right, even after I retired in 2010, for a few years after, right, I'd still get those questions or comments, more likely comments. Nobody had questions at that point. It was just,
unless it's like, how could you?
Exactly.
Okay, well, that sort of brings us to the end. I haven't had a great time just chatting about it, but there is one last thing regular viewers of the show will recognize we have left to do, and that is the Kraken questions.
Release the Kraken.
So essentially, you get to choose one of these 3 faux booster packs. Tell me a color. We'll crack it open. Inside, there is 3 common, random, silly questions and 1 rare game design related question. Which color would you like me to crack there for you, Scott?
Let's go blue.
Let's go blue. Let's see what we got. Let's have a look and see. Inside the blue booster pack, you have got Kraken question, common question number 1. I don't know if you'll have an answer for this. Oh my God, these are silly ones for you. Who does it better, Disney or Studio Ghibli?
Oh, the geek in me wants to say one, but obviously it's Disney.
Well, I mean, they got some new toys in their toy box in the last couple of decades.
Exactly. Yes. Maybe when the card was printed.
It's true vintage.
Since they bought all of the good stuff, they have all the good stuff.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Now, okay, so the next question, common question. If you could work on a game for any IP which you haven't already worked on, which would it be?
Work on a game. Yeah, this is way broad. I don't do well.
Oh, well, let's put it into something more relevant to you. You know, if you could do some sort of professional work that you know would tie into an IP of your choosing, what would it be?
Let's go League of Legends.
Really? Obviously. Wow. Have you been watching Arcana and stuff like that?
I'm not through it, but yes, I'm watching it, so no spoilers. But yeah, and I mean it's broad. So you know, like, I hate to say it because I'm going to get massacred, but like World of Darkness, right? It has a lot of breadth to it. So you've got a lot of room to wiggle there.
That's a fantastic answer as well. Very vibrant characters, like you said, and tons of different worlds and stuff like that. I think you could definitely dig deep. I'm more familiar through Runeterra or Legends of Runeterra or anything like that, but I've always been really impressed with it.
Right.
Third question, common question. It is the silliest of them all. I hope you have an answer for this one. If you were an ice cream flavor, what ice cream flavor would you be?
Huh. All right.
That's the thing about a booster pack. You don't know what you're going to get in it. Sometimes it's garbage. Sometimes it's fun.
Well, let's go with the cookies and cream, right?
Hey, it's a personal favorite.
Not mostly vanilla, but you know, you got a little crunch.
Yeah, exactly. Got to have a little variety in there. That's great. All right, your last rare game design question is, in your experience, what was the most challenging thing about working on a collectible card game?
Yeah, fitting the stuff on the sheets. I mean, the design of the cards is child's play compared to getting the rarities right and getting it printed, right? Because yeah, I often went to Steve and other people to try to get things printed, and I have a background in mathematics, right? So I would invent these little sorting schemes and rarity manipulation schemes that just wouldn't work with the physical equipment available, right? So it was always a process of getting it back down to the 3 sheets or whatever it was. That's always a challenge.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Like, so the physicality of getting cards printed, get them into the hopper in the right way, and getting them into booster packs and stuff like that. It must be very challenging.
Well, it was a problem to solve, so it was exciting.
Well, as a mathematician, I'm sure you love solving those problems.
Right.
All right. Well, that basically brings us to the end of the episode. Before we leave, though, I mentioned it in the intro, but you're actually doing some really interesting work in a different creative space now. You've moved on to photography. Tell us about that and where people can find you in that way.
Right. So now instead of rule mongering, I have another alias. I'm FABLEGRAPH. It's like a photograph, only more epic. Whatever.
I love it.
My primary thing for me is 3D photography. Again, stemming from my math background, I'd gotten into some stereo line. Who cares? Whatever. Got into 3D photography 10 years or 12 years ago, probably about the same time I got toward the end of my vampire career. And so 3D photography fits well with other geeks. So a lot of that tends to be cosplay photography.
And that's on Instagram or something like that?
Instagram, Facebook, fablegraph.com, all over.
Awesome. All right. Well, that will be linked in the description as well. And that sort of brings us to the end of the episode. So one thing I do want to say before we exit, thank you so much to the vampire community for asking all the questions that they did. I'm sorry if your question didn't get answered. And also thank you specifically to BINDUSARA JYHAD Diary. That was a great resource for me when researching this episode, and it will be linked in the description as well. If you're a vampire fan and you haven't checked it out before, by all means, find that linked in the description. Now, that's it from me. My name has been Rands, and this has been another episode of the Booster Pack. Goodbye from me. Goodbye from you, Scott.
Thanks, Rands.
No worries. That's it. And until next time, remember, keep shuffling. And there you have it. That's our episode with L. Scott Johnson, previous lead designer for the longest span that Vampire the Eternal Struggle existed at White Wolf Publishing. Thank you so much, Scott, for sharing those stories, and thank you guys for joining me. Now, remember, I also mentioned it there at the end of that episode, but be sure to check the links in the description because Scott has got a bunch of awesome photography that he does with conventions and cosplay. So if you love that sort of environment and stuff, check that out, give him a follow, and see the work that he's doing nowadays. It's completely different to designing a collectible card game, that's for sure, but it is awesome as well. Now, the other thing I want to mention is I've linked in the description what I mentioned before in the episode. That is the BINDUSARA JYHAD Diary. If you haven't checked that out and you are an old school VtES fan, you are doing yourself a disservice because you need to see the stories that are told in this. It's a fantastic oral history. Again, it's linked in the description of this episode, so check it out there. Now, the other thing I want to mention is if you're looking for old VtES cards or any old collectible card game, check out our sponsors at category1games.com. They have fantastic customer service and really good competitive prices for classic collectible card games all over. They, of course, will be linked in the description as well. Lastly, but not leastly, you can find me. The easiest way to do that is subscribe to this episode and follow along with the Booster Pack. But if you would like to find me on social media, you can find me via Facebook on facebook.com/CCG History, or my preferred method, which is Twitter, which is twitter.com/CCG History. I am active on there every single day and always tweeting about something collectible games related. Also, if you want to send me something that's a little bit more long form, either of those social media DMs are open, or if you'd prefer, we have a new email address that you can reach us on. That is theboosterpack@ccghistory.com, or you can even fill out our survey for listeners. So you can let us know if there's a specific game you want to hear about, if there's a specific creator you want to hear from, even if there is something else altogether that you think this show is missing that you want to see. Let me know there via that survey. You don't have to answer all the questions, answer whichever ones you feel like if you decide to do it, and I will get that feedback. So I read all of the emails, I check out all of the direct messages, and I also make sure I take a look at all of those survey results. So again, if there's any feedback you have, you can either leave it in the comments of this episode, leave a review or something like that, or reach out to me by any of those mediums. Okay, so that's it. I cannot wait to bring you the next episode. It is probably a rare slot. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I have enjoyed bringing this episode to you. So remember, as always, I've said it once and I will say it again because I just enjoy repeating myself. Until next time, keep shuffling.